So good afternoon once again. Today we are in week 6 of the series. Week 6, we have two topics. First, critical gerontology, followed by public policy process, right? And today we won't have our debate as part of the flipped classroom, but instead we'll do an exercise on public policy process, specifically the analysis of public policy. We'll use the CDC's framework that the US uses that, and I'll explain why later on. Thereafter, we'll call it a day. So really, today, it's sort of 3 parts. We are expected to finish ahead of time today. Oh yes, I forgot to say that I will return you the reflective journals with comments. Those of you who are interested, you will already be able to see your mark on gradebook upon 10. Right, that's the full score. All right, let's begin. Okay, so I'll introduce the topic. I'll talk about some of the history of this topic, what the areas it covers, and then I'll zoom into one of the popular areas called ageism, and followed by concluding with new directions or possible directions of research in critical gerontology. People who are at home, I hope you can hear clearly. All right. Okay, you have seen this slide, right? You have seen this slide. Now, how many of you could tell me what this is? Just shout it out from where you are. Birthday card, that's right. Anybody else has some other answer? It looks like something else. It's okay. No, it looks like birthday card, right? Now, what if I tell you that a card like that, with what is written there and printed there, has the power to change how we age? Would you believe that? Think for a moment. Now, oops, I beg your pardon. What if I tell you that a card like that could possibly lead you to have poorer memory when you age, worse fatigue, feel more tired, or perhaps feel more depressed when you age? Is it possible? I see a few nods there. If you are nodding your head, I would like to ask you to think about what possibly might be the mechanism or psychological process involved. Yes. The placebo effect, right? Believing something would happen actually leads it to happen, right? We are aware of that placebo effect, right? Exactly. And part of it we know, if we have taken cognitive psychology, has to do with priming, right? Yes? Cognitive priming. So it was in this case, I'd like to share with you, if you haven't heard about this, 2007 case in Jackson, Mississippi, a 27-year-old man, let's just call him Mr. A. He got enrolled in a clinical trial. Right? A clinical trial is where you test whether a drug, help to test whether a drug has good effect on whatever illness it's supposed to treat, right? I mean, now that we're going through COVID-19, you know what that is. Previously, perhaps you haven't heard of this. So a clinical trial is what you call an RCT, right? Okay. Now, so he went through a clinical trial. Now, what kind of clinical trial? This man, he's depressed. He's really sad. So he thought perhaps a new drug that's being tested could help him. So he went for the trial hoping that he'll feel better. So he was given a bottle of pills. He doesn't know which group he belonged to, so he just took his pills as instructed, thinking that he would get better. Now, as you said, if there was a placebo effect, he would actually get better, regardless of whether the pill was the active drug or not. Thing is, this man didn't feel anything. In fact, he felt worse. Yeah, after a while. And at one point, he was so fed up, he was so low, he just took all 29 tablets and just finished it up. What do you think happened after that? If it was placebo, nothing would have happened, right? If it was the active drug, you might start to think perhaps you have low blood pressure, vital signs might start to go, body temperature might start to go, his physical response might start to resemble that of a person who is kind of in coma or somewhat in a very low state, not very conscious state, or at least an altered state of consciousness, right? So the story goes like that. He suddenly regretted his decision, fortunately, checked himself into the emergency department of a hospital, told the doctor what happened, and he fainted in front of the reception. So the doctors ran through several tests, put him under observation, but they couldn't find any traces of the drug, any traces of any drug in his system, various systems. After 24 hours, the duty doctor concluded he was on the placebo. When he was told the diagnosis, i.e., you're on placebo, he almost spontaneously recovered from all these low blood pressure, almost in coma, all the lack of kind of borderline vital signs, just like that. So you're actually right. There was a placebo effect, but it wasn't a placebo effect. Because if you think about it, a placebo works for the betterment. Yes? When we say in a clinical trial, when we say in the case of, say, COVID-19, if you're given a drug that may be a placebo for treating COVID-19, let's say, when you expect that it will work for you, it would work for you, right? That's placebo. It's the reverse of placebo. It's what we call a nocebo effect. So in 2007, right, this study was published. The idea that negative preconceptions increase the number of adverse effects and symptoms experienced by human beings. The placebo is positive preconceptions increase the number of desirable effects, right? And experiences by human beings. So you could see how this nocebo effect could affect a person. Now, think about aging. When we tell people you are outdated, you are outmoded, what does it do to them? Think about aging. When we tell people that you're old-fashioned, when we even perhaps start to use words like the elderly, the elderlies, aged care facility, moral home for the aged, sick. You must have heard of this place. What does that do to our older folks? In fact, what does it do to you now as young adults when you grow old, when you think about your own aging? This is the paper which, when you have those slides, could go find in our library that talks about the nocebo effect. 2007, right? Now, let's do another experiment on Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word. By now, you would start to realize that I'm kind of a fan or a critic of Microsoft Office. Let's turn on Microsoft Office, any application, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or even Outlook. I'd like you to type in the word old. Just type it in first. Yeah. You have your computer, just type it in and type enter. And of course, don't expect to see any, this time, red wavy line. Old is a word. Yes, it is not Geropsychology. Microsoft Office does recognize this word. That's the good news. Right? Have you typed O? Everybody typed O already? Now, if you don't know how to do this, right, go type. I'd like you to now use the function Shift plus F7. That's the thesaurus. Or you could just open a thesaurus if you know how. You know what the thesaurus is? It allows us to see words of a similar meaning. Now, could any one of us just read the list that you read there, that you see there on the thesaurus by Microsoft Office? Come on. For old. So what are the words that also mean old? Or any of you at home want to try? You could try. Yes. Yes, anybody? Give me at least 2 words, come on. Yeah? Childhood? Okay, yes. Go on. Ancient, thank you. Old-fashioned. Oh no, I didn't catch that. Deep-rooted. All right, some more. Long-standing, right? You probably have these four main ones. I don't know whether your MS Office and mine are kind of the same version, but essentially under ancient, you will have hoary, which means overuse or stale, like bread that is, expired, or time-worn, and you have previous, which is outmoded. Do you have that? Previous? And then you would have old-fashioned, and under that would be several words like archaic, like belonging to the fossils, out of date, outdated, or you would have elderly, right? How many of these words are actually kind of a bit more positive or optimistic? Maybe one, maybe none. Now, I did hear something that is a bit more positive. Some of the words that you have responded with. Now, if you look under elderly, you might find the word mature. Does anybody have that? Mature. Yes? Right. So I thought that is a bit more optimistic. Right? But by and large, if these words are not negative or pessimistic, they are sort of neutral, right? So, point here is that now Microsoft Office has once again helped us define aging. First of all, it doesn't recognize geropsychology. Now it defines aging as these. Think about it. How does Microsoft know what aging is? Comes from probably some other thesaurus, maybe the Oxford English Dictionary, right? And true enough, if you search the Oxford English Dictionary, you won't find words that are too far away from these for old. I'm now going to show you the happiness curve, or what is called a U-bend. Right? It is essentially a curve that shows self-reported well-being on a scale of 1 to 10 for persons aged 18 to 85. Right? And it was published, written by this author here. I'd like you to see the first part of the curve. From 18 to about, say, 50, human beings tend to decrease in happiness. Now, how old are you right now? You are here? I don't know, 21? You're sort of around here. So you would expect that you start to feel less happy, perhaps less satisfied, experience less desirable experiences, encounters in life. That's what human beings seems to report over their lifespan. But guess what? After that age group, oops, that's right, happiness level increases, self-reported. How is that? That kind of goes contrary to what we understand as old, right? If we consider 53, I mean, anywhere above 53, in this case would be the 58 to 61 age band and above. If old was elderly and time-worn and outdated and outmoded and old-fashioned and right, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, you won't find that. Or these people are so demented that, well, everything is happy. Unlikely. Now, that's the happiness curve for us. Now, I'm going to show you the immunity curve. Now, this is popularized by COVID-19 pandemic. What happens to our body physiologically when we're struck with a virus? Right? So antigen A, right? It's resembling a first virus, antigen B or anti-B, right, in blue. So when our body experiences for the first time in antigen or in the virus, an immune response starts to occur. And that's what we call a primary immune response due to the virus or due to the antigen or antigen A. Now, note the amount of time. It's about 1 to about 3 weeks, right? So the average is about 3 weeks. It takes about 3 weeks for the virus to produce effects on the body, the immune response. So think about influenza. It's the same. Right? So COVID-19, we used to think it's 2 weeks. Now it's plus, perhaps 3. Now, if we introduce the same virus to that human body plus another virus, so now virus B, what happens? First of all, the immune response due to virus A would occur sooner. Now, less than 3 weeks is probably 2. And there's a marked response. That means the body now remembers how to fight the virus. There is a virus memory somehow, right? Now, for virus B, unfortunately, because it's still new to the body, it kind of elicits an immune response later and more muted. So the body is only beginning to learn to fight the virus. So what it says here is this: as we age, right, actually our bodies become more immune to viruses. And this is why people age over 50 catch fewer colds and coughs and respiratory symptoms, right, and a host of other immune-related symptoms and illnesses. This is unfortunately not shown or not talked about in public awareness. When we say old, remember in Microsoft Office, when we say old means elderly and outmoded and old-fashioned, we don't think this. We don't think about U-bend, happiness increasing towards later life. Oops. Now, this other chart should be very familiar to us, right? The SLS, Seattle Longitudinal Study. We covered this in the first and second lectures, right? I showed this one. Now, I just like to point your attention to the difference between curve A and curve B. Okay, before I do that, how many of you know what the difference is? I mean, they kind of show age from young to old. On the X, on the Y are the T-score, or you can say memory scores, cognitive scores in those areas. Verbal memory, verbal ability, and so on. Now, who can tell me the difference? Okay, maybe let me help you here. Among which age groups do you kind of see differences between curve A and curve B? Yeah. Younger group, right? Yes, thank you. From the 25 to say, give me a number. Sorry? 83? 23? 53? That's right, thank you. It's no coincidence that the happiness curve had that value there, remember? From 20s to about 50, people start to feel less happy, sadder, and then after that, interesting, right? When people start to feel better and happy about themselves, about their lives, and they also start to lose their cognitive functions, abilities. Thing is, yes, you're right. The differences really lie in the younger age group, but these differences are actually due to time scale. Now, A represents cross-sectional results, whereas B represents longitudinal results. That means in A, one time point, people are asked questions, are tested or measured, right, and compared between the age groups. B, people are asked and they're followed up over years. So we see, if we look at B in detail, that almost everybody from the age of 25 would experience better cognitive abilities until about 50, 40 something to 50. With the exception of the green yellow circle, perceptual speed, right? If you look at B. And thereafter, they experience a decline in all these abilities, but still feeling happy, in fact happier, right? What this tells us, among many other lessons we could learn, is that as we age from young adulthood to perhaps middle adulthood until about 50 or so, we become better. This is the part I'm afraid that popular awareness, popular psychology doesn't tell us. That we actually become better in our cognitive abilities, at least when from the time we are 25 or 20s, early 20s, to the time we are kind of in mid-adulthood. Popular psychology tells us that once you hit a certain age, say 55 or 60 or 65, you decline, right? Okay. before I move on to that, a person who look at this could perhaps say, look, older could mean wiser. And older means when you're 50 plus, it could be wiser than when you're 20 something. Now, what if I told you that when instead old equals outdated? Would that change how you think about aging? What if your birthday card when you are 60 says, look, you are now how many years wiser? We'll look at a birthday card later. This is an interesting piece of research. It's called the counterclockwise research by Ellen Langer in 1979. Back then, she was a young psychologist, and she couldn't understand the rationale that people, when they reach a certain age, above 65, are considered obsolete, considered, kind of useless. So in 1979, this young psychologist at Harvard University recruited a group of elderly men, or should I say seniors, split in two groups. Both groups were told that they were going away for a retreat. A retreat like a vacation. Back then, there wasn't staycation, right? So it's a vacation. And it is a vacation that allows them or encourages them to reminiscence or think about good old times when they were younger. So both groups spent Tuesday in an old monastery just outside Boston, according to the research. Now, the first group and the second group would be reminiscing about the same things. They're given cues, right? However, there's one difference, important one. The second group will be doing something much more exciting. They are actually being sent back in time. What happened was psychologists surrounded the men in the second group with props that come from the 1950s. So this was conducted in 79, 78, right? So these were seniors. Back when they were in 1950s, it probably looked like that. So they surrounded these people with television images, with television commercial, television films, black and white, and perhaps even their own photos in younger days. Music of those in the 50s are quite different from those in the 70s. Right? They are also given topics that are peculiar to folks in the 50s. Now, what happened in the 50s? There was the Cold War. There was just post-World War II. So they talked about those issues. They watched old films, old movies, listened to old songs, and had what we call vintage furniture and radios and household appliances and furniture in the living room in their retreat. That's the second group. The first group, nevertheless still talked about old times, but didn't have these various environmental cues. Right? The second group also discussed Fidel Castro. Right? That was peculiar to the 50s, for Americans in the 50s. Right? They discussed Fidel Castro being marched into Havana in the present tense, so as if they are going through their life in the 50s. Okay, if you recall, that would be what we call the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you know history, that was a very significant event for the folks in the U.S. in the 50s, 60s. That was when Khrushchev was the Soviet Union leader, and that was when Soviet Union began to rise in power and engage in arms race. This is history, all right. So they also admired NASA's first ever satellite launch. Who knows when that was? Which year that was? Okay, you could Google that up, right? They talk about all these happenings as if they just happened like yesterday or the day before. They talk as if they are now 20 years younger than their actual age. This is the second group. There was no modern equipment, no help, no nothing to remind them that they were anything except that they were young, healthy individuals, men. Now, the interesting thing is this. When the men first arrived, many of them were frail, unable to carry their own suitcases. But by the time they left, they were making meals on their own, walking faster as they boarded the bus to leave, and they broke into a spontaneous game of American football. Professor Lang had tests before and after the retreat, and results showed that a great arthritis dexterity difference was measured. Memory, even vision scores improved in both groups. The important news was that the time travel group had a much more significant improvement in all these various scores than the no time travel group. Now, Ellen Langer wasn't satisfied. She asked a group of independent, right, what we call confederates, research participants who had no RP scores to fulfill, to become jury, to actually watch these men in action and form their own observational conclusions or appraisal about their abilities. And these independent judges even said that both groups, in fact, the second group, looked more vibrant. They looked younger. So here is the counterclockwise research, right? It's almost to say, look, if we put ourselves back, right, in time and tell ourselves that we are young and vibrant and energetic and able and willing and strong, rather than old and frail and outmoded and old-fashioned and so on, we could in fact change very objective physiological cognitive outcomes as indicated by the various measures. So you could Google that up once again after this. It's called the counterclockwise study. That is the book that is written after that. And Ellen Langer thereafter perceived that there is this active ingredient called mindfulness that is at work. Something similar to what we call the placebo effect. We'll talk about this a bit more, mindfulness, scientifically, in our lecture on sleep. Right? It is one of the interventions. If we have time, we would actually get to learn the actual procedures on how to do this, called scientific mindfulness. How to practice this on our own and with one another. So here it is. If you are 60 now, you might actually be 21 with 39 years of wisdom and experience. If you start to think that, we start to venture into a new understanding of gerontology or the study of aging, right? That age is to do with ability rather than disability. That age is to do with positivity rather than negativity, right? That age has to do with experiences rather than the loss of functions. Something to think about. Okay. Questions? So that is my introduction. Now the background. So in 1969, the term came about. This term critical theory came about. If you read that paper that I asked you to read, you would find the authors Horkheimer and Adorno. In 1969, they proposed this theory called the critical theory that posits the interplay between science and philosophy, and which explains the issues with the current or then current reality, right, in terms of regarding society. So a critical look at society, in other words. Thereafter, the term critical psychology and critical sociology came about. It emerged in kind of 1970s, and by the time critical gerontology came about, right, it was kind of in the late 1970s and early 1980s in the United States and the United Kingdom. Critical gerontology served to make sense of a broad range of issues then, faced by older adults then in society: insufficient income, poor housing, inaccessible healthcare, poorer than usual sanitation facilities, gender, racial, perhaps even sexual discrimination, and poorer SES, social economic status or position. When older people stopped working and do not contribute to the economy, they become socially disempowered. So according to structural analysis, This disempowerment of individuals makes individuals personally responsible for the problems of society. It's almost like because they can no longer contribute, therefore they're not working. When they're not working, they become beneficiaries of social welfare. They consume society's resources rather than contribute. Right? That was a major issue in society then, and people started to think that major societal problems are associated with aging because these people are less able to contribute. The late 20th century has seen the beginnings of this new paradigm called critical gerontology. Due to life course theory, lifespan development, and age stratification frameworks, right, critical gerontology has come to understand aging quite differently. Critical gerontologists see age as no longer static but dynamic, no longer cross-sectional but longitudinal. And by the 21st century, gerontologists started to embrace critical gerontology as mainstream gerontology, well, begin to. So gerontology is no longer just the sociological understanding or the psychological understanding of aging. It has started to become inter, trans, and by today, multidisciplinary. So today when we say, what is gerontology? You want to say, yes, it's the study of aging. But today we say that gerontology is a multidisciplinary study of aging involving several disciplines, and you could list them: sociology, social work, psychology, public health, public policy, and quite a number of others. The scope. Critical gerontology blends a broad spectrum of perspectives, as I have mentioned earlier. These perspectives were added to critical gerontology over time, as you could tell. So we moved from mainstream, or what we call conventional gerontology in the past, to critical. Mainstream, right, mainstream has encompassed non-mainstream. So critical gerontology started as a non-mainstream, non-dominant idea. And what we used to think that there is a truth, there's an objective truth out there about what is age and what is aging and what are facilities and faculties and functions of aging, right? Or functions of older people. The idea that this knowledge is objective only has now started to give way to what we call subjective realities. That means personal experiences, intrapersonal and interpersonal experiences. That so much so that research methods, and analytical methods no longer kind of split between data and analysis approach. If you think about it, so far in HP 1100 and HP 2100, right? You say, look, we collect data, doing interviews, questionnaire, right? So that's the data, 1, 0 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, that's the data. Then you have analysis method, right? Your ANOVA, your t-test, your multiple regression and correlation and so on. So we are usually taught, at least in the beginning stages, that you kind of put the data into the analysis because the analysis is a tool to make sense of the data. Yes? Now, that is one way to think about research. In critical gerontology, or in now, in gerontology now, we have started to embrace the other idea that, look, the data and the analysis may not always have to be separate. That the researcher, i.e. the data collector, that means you, when you ask people to fill out a form, whether e-form or in person, that means you, when you ask people to do quadrics, when you ask people certain questions and take their verbatim responses, that you are an active generator of data as well. So we are now, research is now moving into this idea, it's starting to embrace this idea that perhaps we cannot always take a what we call positivist approach. Have an expectation, collect the data, and test it. If p-value is statistically significant, it's proven, it's supported. If p-value not significant, not proven. We start to say we may not always this way of doing research, this way of uncovering phenomena and understanding and creating new knowledge may not always be applicable now, especially in our field called critical gerontology. Right. So once again, I've talked about conventional versus critical. So now we move on to three main theoretical sources. Right. So critical theory, I mentioned that earlier, is one component that gave rise to critical gerontology. After critical theory, we start to learn or we start to read about, right, in economics, this idea called political economy. The idea that economic models, economic analysis models have a political/social slant to them. Resource allocation is one, for instance. How should resources be allocated? When resources are allocated in a certain way, it makes a certain markets more efficient, it corrects certain social problems, it reduces certain economic externalities, right? But at the same time, it either consumes political capital, goodwill, if you like, or it contributes to political capital. So think about, for instance, okay, we had this discussion a few weeks ago on whether more resources should be spent on Alzheimer's disease research or social problems, right? If we want to take a very purist approach, the politics involved for spending more time on the latter, i.e. the social problems, rectification, we would, in today's terms, call them kind of the leftists, right? Like, more socialist. So leftist. Whereas those people who would think, look, there is something objective, we should get to the root of the problem, and then once and for all solve it, find a cure, treatment. Right? We call them perhaps the right wingers, the capitalists, if you like. All right. So this idea that economic analysis is no longer just pure market analysis and pure resource allocation and scarce resource, demand and supply in micro terms or in macro terms, but there is a political slant to it. It may even be used as a political tool, has started to emerge at the same time when critical theory was developed. And then finally, there is this field that was also developing at that time called social phenomenology. Social phenomenology scholars argue that mainstream theories of aging take for granted the day-to-day experiences, the day-to-day lived experiences of people as they age. Although these theories examine alternatives in the ideas or conceptions of age and aging behavior along dimensions such as cohort, the alternatives are predominantly understood as contextual or extraneous factors operating upon older people. The interpretation and subsequent reinterpretation of these daily living factors are therefore often lost. In contrast, social phenomenologists pay attention to processes by which age and age-related phenomena are generated and regenerated most initially. They are concerned with the way ideas about and objects of aging are comprehended or understood by those who encounter them and the role these encounters play in generating and regenerating themselves. Okay, that's quite a mouthful here. Essentially, what we are saying in layman terms is this. What happens in society, those occurrences and encounters, those are phenomena. Because those are social in nature, having to do with people to people, people with themselves, people with groups with people, and so on. So this is what we call social phenomena. Okay, and the idea is that social phenomenon actually interacts with itself. Right? Within this whole realm called social phenomena, right? There are lots of interactions between various phenomena, and experiences change from day to day. They are subjective, And when we start to think this way, then several illnesses encountered in older age, like Alzheimer's disease and dementia, perhaps even cancer, are therefore lived experiences rather than illness, rather than pathology. And when we start to think this way, then why is there a need to understand pathological aging and normal aging? No need. This is just social phenomenon, just part of social life. Right? Why categories of normal aging and then successful aging and then unsuccessful aging? Why the need for that? So we essentially see critical gerontology come about kind of as an amalgamation of these three kind of theories of framework: critical theory, political economy, and social phenomenology in the last 30 years. Right. Right. Popular areas in critical gerontology. These are, I guess, what is quite interesting to many of us. Right. Areas now that we understand aging in a different way, something more positive, or something that's lived experiences, subjective, and something that is part of daily life, we start to understand or start to be aware and be sensitive to disparities in health services utilization, let's say, right? In health, what we call health disparities. Why is it that some questions such as why is it that some older people tend to get healthcare access whereas others don't, becomes a question, becomes a problem that is awaiting research resolution. Ageism is another one, as we'll discuss later, as you can see in the slides. In a pandemic like this, is it actually right to continue to say, look, put these old people aside, isolate them because we do not want them to catch illness? Right? How do we understand vulnerability among the older people? What is successful aging? Is it only socioeconomic status? Right? Is it cognitive status? Right? How do we build communities and physical and social environments, i.e. cities and environments, that is age-friendly or perhaps even age-transparent, where age doesn't play a part at all? These become questions that now gerontologists, psychologists, sociologists want to investigate via research, social science research. With critical gerontology in mind, we start to approach various research perhaps by human rights approach, thinking about, say, look, when we provide services, when we treat a certain illness, do we respect the rights of this older person or older individual? Or do we actually think, look, I know better because I'm a professional, I'm a doctor. I know better because I'm a minister who's in charge of all the economic resources of this country or state or city. I know better because I'm the mayor. I take care of your municipality in everyday life. Same thing for life course approach. Instead of just understanding age as a static cross-sectional, right, phenomenon, right, we start to realize that aging is continuous. It's part of human development. It is not static. It may not even be a class like what we call stratification, a stratified class. Like this is old, this is old divided into three. So young, old, middle, old, old, old. But a continuum. Right? And developmental psychologists now begin to incorporate such topics in mainstream developmental psychology. So we would start to see aging and age-related theories appear in textbooks, developmental psychology textbooks. Unfortunately, that would be probably by the time after you graduate. Yeah. Certainly in my days, when I took my first developmental psychology course as an undergraduate, it wasn't covered. Right? I don't even remember if there was a chapter on OH in that textbook. Certainly, I learned none of these theories. I mean, if you think about it, these theories are not new. I mean, those theories that we have come across, the landmark studies like Seattle longitudinal studies, like the preclinical AD framework, that we are exposed. These are not cutting edge. I mean, they're not cutting edge like they were just invented or discovered or proposed by the theorists, say, in the last 5 years or 10 years. No. The roots of those came earlier. When I was an undergraduate, I could have heard about it if these were part of my course. I didn't. There wasn't a course on geropsychology. There wasn't a specialist or expert in the psychology of aging in my division of department of psychology back then. So that was the state. I mean, one could blame it to say, look, you know, you were just unfortunate. Yeah, that's fine. But actually, when we are, I think I will be very realistic and say, look, the development of different fields where knowledge is concerned does take time. And often this, what we call new development on the development of new fields or new subfields often starts as non-mainstream, start in the non-mainstream before they move into the mainstream. Yeah. Okay, questions so far before I go into aging? Okay. No? Okay. Could somebody help me just close the door there? People are just passing by. Thank you. Yes, question. Yep. Okay. Your question is, in Singapore, what approach are we taking to understand gerontology? Okay, thank you for the question. That is a very important question. I'm glad you raised it. We don't have a debate, so if not, we could have a debate on that question, actually. It's a very interesting question. So I invite us to reflect about this. There isn't a straight answer, as you can tell. I cannot say this is the answer or that is the answer, right? So I wouldn't even say it depends. I think I would say, unfortunately, we don't have a dominant approach in Singapore. Yeah. Why unfortunate to me? Well, because as someone who is interested in the field and advocating such thought and approaches, two things. One, theoretically or conceptually, we still do not understand in Singapore what aging is. Yeah. I mean, we thought, I believe we think we do. We hope we do. We hope to believe that we do. But unfortunately, just by what you have, what all of us are exposed so far in the course, the various theories, the various studies that has been conducted, the various results, and you know, you would find that because there isn't one dominant approach and one way to understand aging, when we want to really say we understand aging, we would want to really have in our minds several approaches and be open to test, to at least ask questions, testable questions, if you like, right, on those various approaches. So the research could progress to try to answer those questions. So the answer to that part of the question is no, we don't have in Singapore a dominant approach, unfortunately. In other areas of the world, in the States, for instance, in the Seattle longitudinal study, you could tell that these researchers understand aging to be cognitive function, right? And perhaps the school of psychology there, right, try to include cognitive interventions as services to older people or for older people. Here, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have one at the moment. Okay, so that is theoretically. Now, practically, in terms of services, in terms of interventions, I would say in Singapore, we understand aging as two things: care, social/health care, right? Because these allow services to be designed and developed. You can think of 1,001 social/healthcare services, right, and facilities in Singapore. Second, among these services and facilities, we think of aging as biological slash physical, biological slash cognitive phenomena. So we would see, what we call it, we would see interventions, right, being targeted at correcting some, say, biological abnormality, some, say, physiological, immunological abnormality, dysfunction, disability, if you like. Right? We would also see, to a certain extent, interventions, services, facilities provided in Singapore. Say, in the case of, say, Alzheimer's Disease Association, right? They have dementia daycare center. So focusing on some cognitive aspects of aging. So we see that in Singapore. That's about it, from what I know. So as you know, there are so many other aspects of aging, right? We don't really have an approach, a dominant approach to that. Which, this is a good question. I'd like us to keep this in mind. We would discuss this again later on when we talk about public policy. Other questions so far on material covered so far? Hope I've answered your question. Nope. Okay. Very quickly, let's just tackle the idea of, or the concept of ageism as one of the popular areas. What is ageism? The idea that we discriminate people by age. Essentially, that's it. Just like racism, we discriminate them by Indian, Malay, Chinese, and in other countries, right? Race is many more than those numbers. So here we say that older people are being stereotyped into categories, characteristics. And something positive is that, on the one hand, older people are associated with warmth and friendliness. But on the other hand, they're associated with incompetence and weakness and frailty. So these subjective yet overgeneralized stereotypes overstate the differences, the distinctions, right, between ages as well as between various age groups. And they are also strong influences for what we call, I know better than you, I tell you what to do, you better do it for your own good. That is what we call paternalistic approaches, or paternalistic intervention based on prejudices and age discrimination, i.e. ageism. And unfortunately, this permeates in many aspects of society, including education and healthcare. Think about it. Do you think about, can we have come across a ministry of education anywhere in the world that focuses on teaching people 50s and above? No, unlikely. Perhaps we are going there soon, in some time to come. Think about healthcare. We know that people who are often admitted in hospitals are older people for various illnesses. Some of them are even what we call frequent admitters or frequent flyers. They come in, they leave, they come in again because, say, they keep falling. Right? Or let's say their chronic illness keep flaring up, let's say. Do they get the same intensity and quality of healthcare as younger people? That's the question. In the context of COVID-19, one of the key questions is this: should chronological age be the determinant of acceptable response to the challenge of vulnerability to illness? So we know that older people are vulnerable, more vulnerable than younger people. We have death rate statistics, mortality statistics. We have what we call confirmed infection statistics to prove that. Yep. So yes, that is proven. Thing is, should chronological age be understood as the one and only determinant? Or should chronological age be one of the determinant? The word homogeneous is there because today's context, we tend to understand age as, well, a number. Right? Chronological age means, say, 85 means old. Right? Question is obviously, as you know, understand by now, what is old, right? Is old or older, or in fact age or aging? Is there one dominant understanding of that? Possibly, but may not, not probably. So the British Society of Gerontology said this: we urge the government to reject the formulation and implementation of policy based on the simple application of chronological age. We also call on government and media organizations to be cautious in their use of language. This is 2020. On ageism, directly referring to the pandemic, BSG continued. The stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people on the basis of their age has detrimental consequences for societies and individuals. We reject firmly the ageist and stereotypical assumptions that underlie public and policy pronouncements that rely solely on the application of chronological age. Using age alone as a criterion for decision making is fundamentally wrong. That's BSG for you. How about other places? Writing for World Economic Forum, WEF, I think you know what that is. Akinola said, even before the pandemic, reports showed that many older adults were already more socially isolated due to various reasons and experienced more loneliness than the rest of the population. Coronavirus containment measures, including confinement measures, physical distancing, and restrictions on movement and social gatherings, increase the risk for social isolation and loneliness. In the chapter on health and personality, we know that what this might lead to. The Journal of Clinical Nursing expressed similar views, saying that over the course of the pandemic, we have seen evidence of openly ageist discourses, which we argue complicates the experiences of living through COVID-19 for older people. APA, we are very familiar with this organization. They went further, suggesting that ageism was actually translating into worse healthcare for older age groups. Negative stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination toward older adults during the pandemic can translate into worse healthcare, says APA, and increase the loss of older adults. So think about it. One way is, so you have the illness, you have the coronavirus. Physically or physiologically, this virus causes immune responses, and those who couldn't, people who couldn't mount a good enough response immunologically will succumb to the illness. What APA is saying, look, we are adding another illness. We're adding other illnesses, social isolation, sadness, depression, all the other psychosocial aspects to this illness. So we also know in health psychology, right, that emotions, quality of life / health-related quality of life, right? So, social connectedness plays a part in the health outcomes. Remember the nun study that we talked about? Ageism, okay, APA says ageism negatively affects older adults' mental health as they face being devalued, viewed as a burden, and discriminated against. Ultimately, ageism influences how all age groups view their own aging and older adults. That's APA. Help International says separating generations may worsen intergenerational tensions and ageist attitudes and prevent older people from playing their part in solidarity with younger generations. So if we isolate people in nursing homes, you isolate people in elder care or aged care facilities, they are not part of the national discourse. They're not part of the, in Singapore context, emerging stronger movement, resilience package, let's say. Right? Are they even a citizen of the city or of the country that they live in, that they're born in? BSG agrees with this. It is essential that we continue to foster generational and societal cohesion during the pandemic. Only by bringing the generations together in this time of crisis can we ensure that the least damage is done. Now, the Irish Gerontology Society added a new dimension. Treatment for COVID-19 and other forms of resource allocation associated with this crisis must be based on need. It is concerning that we are hearing reports from other countries that when it comes to decisions around available treatment, be it home care supports, medicines, or ventilation, that age alone was being used as a criteria. If you belong to this age group, or if you're above this age, you get access to a ventilator if you're hospitalized for COVID-19. First round. If you belong to that age group, or you are between this age and that age, you get access if there are no other people requiring access. This has happened in many European countries, in Ireland, Northern Ireland, in Italy, especially in the early stages of the pandemic, and several other European countries. Indeed, the concept of life years saved could be considered to be similarly ageist. Here we see that resource allocation, right? We see kind of a common understanding. Resource allocation in COVID-19 should be based on need, not age. If we base it on age and age alone, that's ageist. Morbidity, i.e. death. Morbidity, i.e. Succumbing to illness or illness. Cumulative chronic illnesses and pre-acute illness, physical condition, should sufficiently indicate or predict likelihood of a good outcome and surviving an illness. We don't need age. An arbitrary age cutoff takes none of these into consideration. It's so simple to have a number. When you register yourself in the hospital or any facility, your name, your age, your sex. It's almost like that is enough to triage you. If you haven't been in healthcare, you understand what triage is. You go to an accident emergency department, you get triaged into serious, you get urgent, not so serious, and not serious. Right? So if age is used as a triage, i.e. categorical variable, if you like, are we practicing ageism? We move on. Prioritizing healthier, younger patients with a higher chance of recovery has been suggested in other countries as ageist in the extreme. And if we say, look, life years saved as a priority, are we being ageist? So the key issue here is older adults are a homogeneous group. An increasing portrayal of those over the age of 70 as being all the same with regard to being helpless, frail, and unable to contribute to society. Are we now back to the older days, the days of 1970s where we need a theory called critical theory to deal with social phenomena? World Economic Forum. Ageism tends to paint all adults as the same. The reality is that older persons are diverse, have different identities, and they are more than their age. So early mortality data in COVID-19 tells us that there are 3 risk factors: age, gender, and pre-existing illness. Why is it that we stratify or categorize simply based on the number? During this pandemic, we must be mindful that every age group in society, older people are a very heterogeneous group. There are many older people who are very well. We must caution against placing all older people in one homogeneous group. Labeling all adult adults as highly vulnerable, frail, and passive agents is obviously incorrect and inappropriate. The outlier in this debate comes from, well, the BGS. We see major differences between different groups in healthy life expectancy at 65. However, even fit older people show poorer immune responses than their younger selves in the face of the infection. The speed of the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't allow us to assess each person over 70 for individual risk. Fair enough. And the government has to make a pragmatic decision. We could possibly say this in the acute phase of any pandemic, when it was or it is an epidemic, let's say. But as an epidemic wears on to become a pandemic, should we continue to treat the situation as a crisis still and make quick decisions, or rely on quick decision mechanisms, rule of thumb, heuristics? So what happens after an emergency? What happens after a crisis? Do we continue to use age as a homogeneous category to determine access to health and social care services? Right? Do we continue to use a rule of thumb simple response to an emergency / crisis? Right? Given time to reflect upon the data that we now have on the pandemic for the past year, why has this not changed? There's something for us to think about in our journals. Are we still very preoccupied by crisis? Yes, perhaps in some cities. At what cost to policy is such an approach? Right? So after the previous quote, BSG, after asking these questions, interestingly, BSG hasn't commented publicly on, right, on their questions or findings. So finally, we come to a possibly a debate topic, but we won't have a debate on this. Do we now see in the course of navigating COVID-19 ageism, called institutional or institutionalized ageism? Or do we see very practical, very pragmatic public health policy at play? Right? Do we see a priority on individual aging? Or do we see a priority on population aging? Do we understand aging to be something objective and therefore a health crisis is something objective? Or do we understand a health crisis as something more subjective based on individual health / social experiences? Do we reduce complex phenomena into some one or two size fit all so we could reconstruct reality? Or do we try to understand the various facets of reality? Right? Ultimately, do we, in doing what we do in the pandemic, right? Do we promote or do we reduce negative stereotypes of older adults? Whether or not we promote or reduce, do we actually do that intentionally? Do we actually do that institutionally? Do we have organizations, public health, public social institutions that actually carry out, that actually in the course of carrying out the day-to-day functions and operations, right, enhance or reduce ageism, even in this pandemic? Right? I hope these thoughts make you start to question what aging is and start to put the ideas on and various approaches to aging into real life. Right? This pandemic may be something in the century, once in the century, because the next one we will have disease X, right, which is supposed to be worse. So are we then actually ready for disease X? Are we ready to, right? Are we ready to do physical distancing, but yet at the same time be inclusive in a society? That's the question for us to think about and reflect in our journals. Okay, so future directions of research in critical gerontology will have kind of four main areas. Certainly ageism / racism is one of them. And as you would realize by now, climate change, because it is now a phenomenon, an environmental phenomenon that affects the whole world, that that what we call gerontology would have to kind of take into account climate change factors. The idea that older people might be doing things, their daily activities in harsh weather or harsh climatic conditions, right? Seniors may not tend to, say, move or migrate when climate change occurs. That may or may not be detrimental to them. And even if they do move, are they given equal access to migration facilities, to migration opportunities? NGOs, we realize, especially now in the pandemic, that there are many things that governments cannot do. There are many anti-pandemic measures that government cannot simply implement. So Singapore is perhaps one exception in the world where the government seemed to be able to effectively implement several measures to contain the virus and to curb the economic fallout of the coronavirus. This is not the case in many other parts of the world for several reasons. Critical gerontology will have to understand why and understand the role of NGOs. It is likely that NGOs are going to rise in prominence over time in the area of providing services to what we call marginalized older people or older people who may not get services. And finally, what we call gerontology or older adults in the digital world. We already know prior to the pandemic that the digital market, the digital economy is on the rise. It is disrupting normal economic or usual conventional economic activities, even social activities as well. So now with aging, could our older folks be involved? Could our older folks actually be part of this digital revolution? Right? Could our older folks actually simply, are they just relegated to use technology to navigate day-to-day life or even to navigate care? Or could they actually contribute to the development of the digital technology? Could they actually contribute to the development of the digital world? Right? Could gerontologists bring technology into research on aging? Okay, that's really my last line on critical gerontology. Any quick questions before we have a short break? Nope. Okay, let's take maybe 10 minutes then. 5:02, come back for the next part, 5:02. Okay, let us resume. I'm going to distribute the journal entries and talk generally about some of the observations. Okay, Phoebe. All right. Yeah, Natalie isn't here today. All right. Okay, so I've just distributed the reflective journal. Have a quick look at the comments. If you see anywhere beyond one statement, that would be to me a long comment. So if you see a statement, right, most of you would have some statements there. There's probably one or two whom I don't have much to add beyond what I would later show as general comments, right? If you see kind of one or two statements written there, that if you see two, that to me is a long comment. It's a more specific comment. Okay, if you see one, then that is, well, a comment. Okay, we should move. Okay, so I gave points to people who tried to follow the rubric. The rubric is stated in the course outline quite clearly. So things like being able to form one's own theory, being able to generalize to other situations, and as well as personal situations from what we learned in class. Those are given points, right? I'd like us to think about, okay, I don't know if you wondered about why there is a word limit to even an exercise like that. Now, how many of us, just by a show of hands, find it challenging to write within 500 words? Hands up. By a show of hands. Right? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. So these three groups, these two groups are okay with 500 words. Okay. Um, I don't know if you know this. Journal articles are limited to 3,000 words in psychology, mostly, right? Qualitative studies, 5,000. So a topic like is ageism experience in COVID-19 is limited to 1,000 words. Right? Why do you think there is a word limit? Okay, one reason, very practical. Journals don't have all the space for you. Every space is money. Okay, fine. But what is the core here? What is the main reason why we have word limit here? Have you wondered? I mean, you're not in year 3, year 4, right? Some of you should have answers to this. Why is the word limit important? Anybody? Yes, Phoebe. To concisely, we want to encourage conciseness to bring up the point. Thank you very much. Let's work on that. That is right, but we could go further. Why do we want to concisely bring up our points? What is the root cause there, or what is the root reason here? Why do we not want to use all the space and all the words available to us at our disposal to bring up our point? Yes. So that what we put out is valuable and meaningful. Valuable and meaningful. Yes. So that what we bring up is valuable and meaningful. Well, that means if we use too many words to say ageism or critical gerontology, it loses its value. Critical gerontology concepts loses its value if it's being presented in 1,000 words than if it's being presented in 500 words. Yes, I can understand the value, but what is the value here? Other people? I haven't thought about that. Is there a psychology assignment you have done that has a word limit more than 5,000? Besides your thesis, FYP. Okay, have you done anything that's between 3 to 5,000? 3,000 to 5,000? Yes? Okay, I see some nods out here. You have never asked the lecturer or the professor or anybody why is there a limit? Now, do you get 10% plus minus to that word limit? Yes, some of you get, some of you don't, right? Depending on which prof and which assignment. Okay, to me the thing is this. People don't read. Professors don't read. Readers of journal articles search for what they want to read and read what they want to read. They don't read other things. Hence, there is a need for abstract. In fact, hence there is a need for a suitable title to entice or attract people to read the abstract so that they would perhaps read the article. So I like your point when you said value, but the value is, to me, the attraction of people to read what you have to say. Yeah. So this is a training that I hope to impose here to hopefully get us to write something that people would read, to share your thoughts in a way that people would read. So that is why I would say the word limit is non-negotiable. Now, I'd like you to also check your similarity report. I have allowed numerous or multiple submissions, and I would only read the final submission that you bring to class in printed format as well, which is supposed to be identical to the Turnitin final version. So I will mark that. So mark is given for that, right? So I hope that is accurately reflected. You could, before your final submission, see your own similarity report by Turnitin. And then now, I don't go by, different people approach similarity differently. I don't go by the total percentage. No, I don't. I look at this. Do I find 2 or more or 3 or more non-adjacent sections of your work or what you claim to be your work to kind of come from the same source as indicated by the similarity report? So if let's say paragraph 1, say I have 7 words, paragraph 2, 3 citations, paragraph 9, another, say, 1 sentence, kind of a link to one source, then I start to entertain ideas about perhaps you are not being so original. Sure, you can paraphrase, sure, you can use words that other people have used and so on. In which case, then you should cite to give credit. That is an academic rigor that is expected of all students who write. Right? So I allow you time to revise and resubmit until the due time or due date, which is usually 5:30 p.m. of the, I think, first or second Wednesday of that month. Right? So I hope you do that and make good use of this Turnitin. And okay, terminology. Now that we have discussed ageism, right? I just like to point out that you want to, those of us who have used the word elderlies, you want to think more strategically about whether this term or terms like that is appropriate. Right? In some situations, it may be. In some other situations, it may not. I know there are journals in gerontology which explicitly and specifically discourage or even prohibit the use of this word because the mere use exhibits ageism. Yeah. So I like you to think about this as you write your future journal entries, right? So I would say a more neutral way to write would be older people, or older adults, or older population, right? Okay. I kind of summarize. I kind of look across all the entries, and I find that the topics you like to write about are these four. Many of you went into week 3's topic on AD dementia, which is good. I think that topic and the debate that came from there kind of make you think quite a fair bit, and you had several thoughts on that, and you struggle to kind of contain that in 500 words, right? Some of you talked about week 1 and week 1's content on sandwich generation and informal caregiving. And certainly, at least a quarter or a third of us referred to the debates, whether week 2 or week 3 or I think week 4 debates, where I prepared us for the actual debates, right? So it's actually because of those debates that I realized recording the debates would help you reflect. So the recording of those debates are already on our course media in NTU Learn. Okay, I gave marks or points for these strengths, right? More specifically aside from just what the rubric says, I give marks for things like that. What caused change of your own thought and mind on certain issue, on a certain approach to learning about aging or learning about the psychology of aging, right? What do I as in you, right? What do I plan to do after this? Now that I realize this, now that I have learned this, now that I think I should do this way, right? I gave points for this. When you write about how I understand the theories, how I put all the theories together, right, and apply that in my own context, my own environment, right? Why had I not, when you start to reflect about why had I not paid attention to this earlier, right? I gave points for that. I gave points to description of why I find it difficult to change this thought or emotion, even now, even though that now it is proven to be right or proven to be wrong, right? So to me, that is reflection at a deeper level. So I encourage you to, in subsequent journal entries, consider these points. These are not obviously non-exhaustive, not the only ways to write, right? There are various ways to be original, various ways to form your own generalizations, conceptions of the material presented, and apply them to your own situations. A number of you did write, or I would say provide self-disclosures or personal experience sharing in terms of your family situations, personal encounter with, say, death, with caregiving, with, say, retirement of somebody in your household or in your family. That is good. I encourage you to take that further to also include how that help you apply the material learned in discourse, or how that help you think or does not help you think about the material in this course. How that might be a hindrance, a barrier, or be an impetus to your understanding of the psychology of aging. Right? So I hope you go beyond just saying, okay, this is related to my experience, this and that and that and that. Therefore, this is important. Right? To me, it is a bit too big a jump if you do not go a bit deeper to say, look, this has happened to me. I learned this. This is important because I feel this way, because I think this way. I used to think this way, now I think this way. Right? Okay. So areas of improvement. Wayne did a fantastic job in summarizing the main points in the debate. I don't give marks for this. There's no need to write this. I learned this and that, A, B, C, D, E from the textbook, from the debate, from the lecture. That is not what the journal is about. The journal is about your own thoughts, your own internalization, not the objective content. All right, not a list of what you learned. Right? It is also not A is connected to my mother's condition, B is connected to my grandmother's condition, and that's it. What do you learn from there? If A is connected, how is it connected? In what way? Psychologically, in psychological area, psychosocial area, economic area, right? And what does that mean to you? So it's connected to my mom's condition. So what? Why is this important to you? It's important to you because say you love your mom very much. It's because you get to see the very last moments of your mom or your dad or your grandfather prior to his demise, let's say. Right? It's because it is the first time you witness a person's body turn cold, let's say. Okay? Now, then that to me is something that to me will be a strong use of personal experiences. Finally, I used to not like or loathe working with elderly. Now I love to work with them. Right? So say why. Right? So they used to be smelly. I used to think that they're smelly and dirty and clingy and so on. Sure. So now I think they're lovable, adorable, and 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 perhaps possesses lots of wisdom and things I want to learn from them. That's a bit better, but I think you can go deeper than that with the material you have learned in this course. Okay, so I hope this helps some questions, clarifications from whatever I've written there and whatever I've said. Anybody? Okay. All right. So this is the first one. You have two more submissions to go. I do hope and expect that I will read of deeper reflections and better submissions, more thought-provoking submissions. This is really part of what this course is about, to make you think more critically, to make you think also more creatively, and both your creative and critical thinking hopefully would also bring about some personal experiences or some personal engagement or relation to your personal, your unique, your peculiar experiences. Any questions before we go on to, no? Okay? Okay. All right. Let's go on to the public policy part. Okay. All right. We now move to, okay, public policy process. Okay. So, in Singapore, the Civil Service College has a framework that kind of guides various public agencies in evaluating their policies, in analyzing current policies, and also to kind of shape or create new policies, right? First of all, what is policy? Policy, as defined by the CDC in America, is a set of laws and rules and enactments. It's not just one, but several types. Right? It could be community engagement. It could be various measures, right? So this is Singapore's CSC's policy process. From the top, you could see initiate policy, start something, right? Cyclical process. So then identify and analyze the problem, followed by identify various options or alternatives, followed by make a decision on which of these alternatives you want to move on, and then the public agency should implement that policy. If that policy translates into enacting new laws, then the minister should bring it to parliament. If that policy involves public education, then some kind of a campaign should be launched, for instance, right? And then evaluate the outcome of the enactment or the implementation, right, via various research/evaluation type of you can say setup. And then because of that evaluation/research in outcome, that would allow for new policy thinking or thinking on new possible policies to improve current outcomes, currently observed outcomes. Essentially, that is the framework, right, adopted in Singapore. In between, of course, the government in Singapore focuses or prioritizes, or I would say, strongly advocate values, ethics, principles of governance, things like integrity, accountability, for instance. Now, so that is Singapore's policy process. Before I go on into Center for Disease Control and Prevention's policy process, I'd like you to think about um, I'd like you to think about the, the why the need for some kind of public policy in aging. All right. Now, in our previous 5 weeks of classes, you've learned several theories, main theories and sub-theories of different fields. You have been exposed to the biological theories and one or two topics in biological aging. Then you've been exposed to the cognitive theories, and I think mainly dementia, followed by a few other cognitive phenomena, right? And I think that's about it. When we move into the social phenomenon on aging, you would find that they are not necessarily only social. We find that it's often that social phenomena of aging, such as retirement, or what we think retirement to be, right, often kind of presuppose or presumes some knowledge, presumes some understanding, some knowledge, some mainstream understanding of biological processes, cognitive processes of an older person, and biological and slash cognitive phenomena of an older population, right? So why we want to think about policy is because it allows for, it is one way to effect change. It is one way to effect change. It is also something that critical gerontologists are beginning to do. They call this advocacy, to advocate a certain point of view. To debate is to persuade a point of view. Like cognitive aging is physical aging, right? Yes, I agree. No, I don't agree. You say why, you produce evidence, you counter the evidence of the other side in your own favor, hopefully so that other people are persuaded to take your position, right? Now, in advocacy, we take that one step further. We demonstrate, right? Beyond just speech and talk, we demonstrate. You can say the usefulness, the effectiveness, the efficacy, the importance, the strength, the value of a certain point of view. That is policy. In social gerontology, or critical social gerontology, to be specific to that particular subfield, we find that many of the processes in aging could be explained or could be amenable to change at the population level, hence policy. At the public level, hence policy. All right. So for our purposes in this course, for the advocacy, the digital media project, it has two components, as you know. One is a digital media production and presentation, and the other one is an individual write-up of what you did, right? We would use CDCs for two reasons. One is that CDC's process framework is highly transparent, i.e. there are actually online training you could do. And I could point you to the various web pages to do that, right? It is highly transparent. They give several examples on how public health policies are made using this process, how public health policies are analyzed using this process. Okay, that's one reason. The other reason is that it is considered in the field of at least public health / health psychology as the mainstream at the moment. In fact, WHO in the containment of COVID-19 actually does refer to America's CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, right, for guidance, right, on public health care policy, international public health care policy. Right. Okay, I'm going to go through quite quickly these 1, 2, 3, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components. I want to spend more time on the exercise that you would do as part of this learning to gear up to your project. Okay, so CDC says we need to identify the problem. How do we identify the problem? Right? We clarify and frame the problem in terms of effect on public health. Right? So something is happening, or this is not good, that is not good, because it leads to some undesirable public health outcome, like mortality, that means death, or morbidity, many illnesses, comorbidities, right? Co-occurring illnesses, right? So to do this, to identify problem, we could not just base it on how do we base our process on? We collect information, we collect data. Often those are operational data, say hospital admission statistics, for instance, death rates, right? Death statistics. Define the characteristics in these 4 areas: frequency, severity, scope, and impact. Then we identify gaps in the data. So oftentimes we cannot find enough data or enough information, right? So that is when we realize, okay, how severe is the gap? Do we want to plug the gap? How important is the gap for solving a certain public problem? And then finally, we frame the problem or issue in a way that lends itself to solution, a policy solution. So that's step 1, according to CDC. Identify the problem, write down the problem as specifically as we can, support the problem statement or statements with credible findings that may be that may arise by original or new research/evaluation, or may arise by existing research results. Say you do a literature review, for instance. Next, right? Identify policy options. So this is where we call policy analysis, right? We look for various ways to perhaps plug the gap or solve the public problem, okay? And oftentimes we don't really know which way works. So we may need to do another study, right? Either qualitative or quantitative study to actually test out whether a certain way works in a very perhaps clinical or controlled way, perhaps with a small population or small segment of a certain population, to kind of say, look, okay, we did a pilot test. It seems to be promising because out of 100 people who have experienced X problem, right, there's increase in that indicator and so on, right? So that helps us to describe the problem more accurately, test for efficacy/effectiveness of policy solution, and then we could perhaps rank them and prioritize the various alternatives. Then, as part of policy process, we identify, according to CDC, a strategy or the strategy to get that policy adopted. Adopted by who? Well, by any public agency that is most suited to implement. By any public agency, or in fact by not just public agency, but any organization, by in fact perhaps even the public, right? If you do public education, that is crucial, right, in effecting the policy. So often we think of public organizations or public agencies as being crucial to say effecting certain policy, right? Because they will have rules, they will stipulate regulations. The minister there may even bring a new law to Parliament for approval, for new legislation to be made. But we also know that we oftentimes have to, when it comes to public health/social issues, we may need to often include the community at various levels. So community organizations may also be involved here, right? So we need to, often if we use this model at stage 3, we involve these various stakeholders in discussion, in brainstorming, in coming up with ways to operate the policy. And possibly we may draft laws, regulations, procedures, actions, and so on here. Then at stage 4, we enact or implement the policy. So the minister will bring the draft legislation to Parliament, to Congress, right, and so on, right? Or if legislation has already been approved previously, then new regulations are drafted for agency enactment. Procedures, or what we call SOPs, used. Right? It may lead to administrative action. We think about how to adjust or how to stipulate new incentives if those are deemed to be useful. But sometimes incentives may not be useful, In fact, there are other times when incentives may be counterproductive to the intent of the policy. And then we see if there are voluntary practices which may be necessary. So that means sometimes a policy could not just simply rely on a public agency to be effected or to be implemented. And that is when we need to look beyond governmental agencies to NGOs. Hence, earlier on, when we talk about critical gerontology, the rise of NGOs, right? Often in third world or in developing cities or places, you find that the reach of NGOs or NPOs, non-profit organizations, um, tend to be superior to the reach of public agencies for various reasons. Some are very instrumental or practical reasons, like just how deep in the jungle one goes or how, the terrain, but there are often other socio/political reasons behind those in various developing places. Oops, sorry. Finally, the policy, okay, I beg your pardon. Just now it was supposed to be enactment. Here is where the policy is implemented. I beg your pardon. In enactment, we plan. Sorry. In enactment, we plan, we work things out, we troubleshoot. It's in implementation that the pilot becomes mainstream, that the plan becomes action. Okay, that the approval translates into operation. Okay, so there are various, In implementation, we often say, let's start with a pilot or let's start with smaller scale. Let's restrict the implementation of this new policy to this group first, to this city first, to this town first, to say maybe this place first, and so on. And then in Singapore and in many places, we have this term, we call it from pilot to mainstream. So we pilot here, we pilot there, we pilot this, and then they seem to be successful. Now let's bring it to, let's have it for the whole country, for the whole city. Okay, oops. Right. So, okay. Stakeholder engagement and education. I mentioned this a bit in kind of part 1 and part 2. Really, engaging stakeholders and educating them often are involved in all of the 5 stages. Think about it this way. If policy is only made by policymakers, i.e. public agencies, right, we would necessarily find that the stakeholders don't understand them, or perhaps don't trust the efficacy of these policies, and may not want eventually to be a part of the implementation. So it's almost like doing business, right? You want to sell a product, okay? You can tell your customers how good it is, demonstrate them in the use. But often the best marketing tool is to show a satisfied customer, right? Better still, if this satisfied customer is a known person, like a celebrity. If some celebrity endorses a certain product or service, right, people who like him or her, or people who trust him or her, it's likely to take a second look, never mind if it translates to sales. So that's the idea here. You want to start with respected individuals, organizations, right, who are stakeholders of a certain policy. That means it means something to these people. So if you want to have a policy on countering or preventing dementia, you want to, in Singapore's context, say involve the ADA, Alzheimer's Disease Association, right? If you want to have a policy that takes care of caregivers, family caregivers in Singapore, you want to engage, say, the Silver Cooperative organization, Silver Cooperative Limited. This happens at every stage. These stakeholders also help actually in every stage to give you feedback, give the policy maker feedback in various stages. Yep. And finally, the idea of evaluation/research. Now, there is a distinction here. When we say research, right? We often refer to knowledge creation. That means we have a certain theory, we want to test whether the hypothesis arising from the theory is supported by data or not. The output of research, new knowledge, right? New knowledge. Okay, for instance, Alzheimer's disease is caused by accumulation of amyloid beta, right? That's new knowledge. Okay. Evaluation often is tied to a certain service or a certain program or a certain policy. So a certain policy could include a certain enactment of a law, procedure, and so on. So we want to evaluate whether, there are many evaluation indicators. We can say we want to evaluate whether it has been followed by enforcement agencies, whether we can also evaluate on, say, whether people understand, enforcement agencies understand the policy, whether then the recipients or beneficiaries of the policy also understand the goodness of the policy or badness of the policy. So evaluation, we say, could actually occur in various stages. We could evaluate whether we have identified the problem accurately, specifically. We could evaluate whether we made a sound analysis of existing policy options. We could evaluate if we have developed effective strategies for policy development. We could evaluate if we have enacted the policy in the appropriate medium. Say, if it's a legislation, right? You went through, say, Congress, or you went through Parliament at a certain point in time. We could also evaluate on the various implementation statistics of any policy. So here we have, it's a 5-part process that includes 2 overarching processes, a total of 7. Right? That's the CDC's process in making public health policy. Okay, that's, you can say, the idea here. I'd like us to, as part of practice and gearing up to our project, think about this. In your groups, right? In your teams, you're now already seated in teams. I'd like you to define a public health problem that may be caused or aggravated, that means made worse, by age discrimination in Singapore. So any public health problem. Right? So what is a public health problem? Think about health. Okay, you can think, if you want to think simply, it could be a health condition or illness that's experienced by many. That's a public health problem. Right? It could be, say, some social/economic condition that predisposes many to certain illnesses. Say, for instance, you want to say, look, a public health problem is just poverty. Right? Being poor, being financially unable to afford, right, may actually cause or aggravate. Being poor may actually cause one to not seek healthcare, right? Never mind the healthcare is provided free, but being poor may actually cause one to have a kind of a mental block or psychological barrier to seeking health care, let's say. So here, I'd like you to think about ageism. We have discussed ageism at length just now, the various facets of ageism, discrimination by age. It may be in healthcare, it may be not. Right? But here, how are any of the aspects of ageism, right, giving rise to any public health problem? So I'd like you to also focus the context in Singapore. Just think of one. So I'd like you to just define one. There were many, of course. So think of one, discuss it in your group. Right? Think of one problem that may be caused by ageism in Singapore. One public health problem. Okay? To help us do that, I have summarized, I have given you 2 reading materials, right, on this. One is called the CDC's Public Policy Framework. One is called the Policy Analysis Framework. I have summarized this part on problem identification. Essentially, I'd like you to pay attention to 5, more specifically the 3 in red. Identify the problem, think up a problem, write it down in as specific manner as possible in terms of these 5 things there, the frequency of its occurrence. Very frequent. How frequent is very frequent? Every day, or every hour, every month. So to do this, you may need to do some Googling and reading. You may want to read some, some newspaper. I mean, say Straits Times reports, or go to NTU, our library, and do some searching. Right? Severity, that means say how many people died because of this, right? The problem, right? How many people are at risk? Right? We want to find out information like that. One is the economic / budgetary impact. That means due to, say, this problem, how much of GDP is lost, or how much of money is spent on, out of pocket by consumers, by patients, or by family members due to this, right? And if you can, try to find out the 5 whys and 5 Ws. That means why, where, when. What are those? Why, where, when, what, and okay, just lost here. Why? Okay, you know what the 5 Ws are, right? And the 1 H, the how. Okay. So of course, we don't have much time. I'm getting us started. So of course, I understand there will be a limit to how much information you can find. So I'd like you to at least do 1, 2, and 3 to the best of your ability in class. So 3 will be with 1 and 2, you could then define the problem. After you kind of identify or think up one, go search up information on the severity, the frequency, the 5W1H. Then at number 3, you could then write it up in a statement or 2 statements. Be as specific as you can, write it based on 2. Right? Then, of course, if you have time, right, 4 and 5. So let's see how we're doing on time here. 44. How about 6 o'clock? So we just use about 15 minutes. Do however much you can in your groups. You may want to split up the work, right? But before you split up, discuss and come to one consensus on, okay, let's try to tackle this problem. Public health problem, right? So the problem shouldn't be ageism. Yeah, we know there's such a thing called ageism. Ageism is causing or will cause or has caused what? We want the what, okay? Right, go ahead. 6 o'clock. Okay, let's resume in about a minute. Okay, do wrap up. It's okay, you couldn't finish. I'll ask every group to just simply share whatever you have. Yeah, it's okay if you're not finished with all 5. Right. So could every group just send somebody just grab a piece of that wet wipe there? I'm going to pass this microphone around so then you could talk into this and then you could wipe it and then the next group could just use it. All right. Okay. Okay. How about this side? Would you like to go first? Yeah. All right. So what I like every group, just have one person just share essentially what you have found. I mean, what you could share for 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Never mind if it's incomplete, you're not sure, say you're not sure where, and that's when we learn. I like us to go through this process to start to be familiar with, to be exposed to the process. All right. So push up the microphone switch first. Yes. All right. All right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Can I ask you to restate the problem? Unwillingness, the word is unwillingness of seniors to seek mental health help for mental illnesses. Oh, sorry. All right. Medical help, right? Unwillingness. And you found, okay, this group, the 3 of you found a study to support the contention that actually it's caused by ageism, age discrimination. Okay, you have identified various stakeholders. Okay, have you some sense of the scope? How widespread is this problem? Like the whole Singapore 5.4 million population, or okay, thank you. So your 5% is an understanding of scope. The low income and isolated seniors seem to be at risk of this. So essentially, the scope would be limited to this lower or low income older people and more isolated people. Of course, then it begs to for policymakers to understand what constitute isolated and what constitute low, how low is low income, and then how many people would then fall into these categories. Right? Okay, thank you very much. Next group. Maybe just pass the mic to that behind. Yeah. So tell us the problem in as specific and as clear terms. Yeah, please get you wipe already, right? Later after you speak, do wipe it, right? So yeah, just for safe measurement, safe measures. So tell us as in a specific term as possible what the problem is, and then say, say the various components. Yeah. Oh, I didn't get it. Elderly? Loneliness. Okay. All right. Loneliness. Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. 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 Right. Could you help us once again restate the problem? Yes. The problem is elderly loneliness. Okay, so if the five of you come up with identify the problem to loneliness. For me, the question is, okay, you have tried to say loneliness causes or aggravates, that means make worse several other problems. I mean, you have talked about the various health, mental health, right? Okay. How about the concept that ageism causes loneliness or aggravates loneliness? Right. Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I see where you're coming from. Again. Both directions, sure. Bidirectional. Okay. Yes, A cause B, B cause A, sure. What I want to say is that, yeah, you have done quite a fair bit. You have defined even the scope and give us some numbers. I think that for this problem, the challenge is actually to classify as a public health problem, because I'm not saying you cannot classify loneliness as a public health problem. What I'm saying is, among the various measures or indicators of this problem, or among the various things that are in turn caused by loneliness, right, and adverse effects of loneliness, those in themselves may or may not tend to be understood or misunderstood as public health problems on their own accord. You see, example would be, say, when you say loneliness perhaps cause or or soon will lead to depression, right? Clinical depression, which is an illness. So that may in itself be a public health problem. Yeah. I mean, this is just my comment. I mean, it's okay. You're limited time. I understand. I'm just saying this also for the benefit of the rest of us. Often the process is iterative. So we try to identify a problem, as this group has done, go through the various findings and survey results and newspaper articles and so on and so forth. Then sometimes at the end of it, we may realize there's a bigger problem out there. we may realize there's a clearer problem out there, right? And it may even lead us to redefine the problem, relook the problem. That's my point. Thank you. All right. Could you please kindly clean it and pass it to the group, the microphone? Yep. Yep. Crystal and Valerie's group. State the problem and go through whatever you found. All right. CVD. Okay. Yes. 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 Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Help seeking behaviors. That's right. Right. Mhm. Yes. Okay, thank you. Credible work for a 15-minute exercise. There is a, just to add on, yeah, can you clean the mic? Just to add on, there is a document called Global Burden of Disease. I don't know whether, I think you have kind of alluded to that. So yeah, your ranking number 4 probably comes from there. So Singapore, right, does its global burden of disease every year, right? And so there are various indicators there like years lost to life and what DALYs and so on, right? YLLs and DALYs and so on. So that is one way to find scope. Okay, thank you. We move on. Yep. Shamin, group. Yep. Great. Yeah, sure, sure. Any one of you, sure. Hearing loss. Okay. Yep. Right. 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 Mhm. Right. Okay. Okay. I have a good idea now on the problem, hearing loss, the scope, how many people, prevalence, incidence, the potential causes related to ageism, the budgetary impact. Could you identify the stakeholders? All right. Okay. Who do these people represent, or who do these people deal with? Agency for Integrated Care and the other one, right? Okay, thank you. That's right. Good. I can see you have essentially covered 1 to 5. I mean, in scope. Though, yep, with more time, we can go deeper. Thank you. Yeah, kindly clean the microphone and then we move on to this group. Okay. So this group, you want to get ready your tissue paper to clean the mic thereafter. Okay. We want to, after we do these 5 steps, right? After we get this group to share, actually move on to the analysis bit. There is a document that I ask you to read on the analytical framework, and there are actually guides on actually how to do this next part, which actually is the most, I would say, extensive one. You would usually spend most of your time on the analysis bit. So we are actually still at the identification. So you already start to see for your own self as you go through the process that identifying isn't so easy, right? Aside from it being an iterative process, it is also that you want to find credible information, right? And it's also that you want to understand stakeholders. The names of those organizations may not immediately or be intuitively associated to what we think they represent or who we think they represent. Okay, this group. Ageism leading to depression. Okay. 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 You have credible information on the link between ageism and depression. Okay, go on. Mhm. Right. Yep. Yes. Right. Yep. Comorbidities of depression. All right. Right. Okay. Any stakeholders? Sure. Okay. Could this group or could you just tell us where you got that piece of information from on prevalence of depression in Singapore? So who conducted the study or which organization or yeah, the name of the study if you like. Yep. Okay. All right. So Mount Alvernia Hospital studied their own patients. Okay. All right. Okay. Sure. Thank you. Very good try also for just a 15-minute preparation time. You essentially covered almost, I think, almost all of the five. For you, the problem is depression. Depression. Okay, I think now I can kind of from each of your five, each of our five groups, each of your groups, each of your presentations or well sharing, I see a challenge that all of us face or may face, and that is to try to, or that is try to understand the problem, or to state, or to write, or to describe the problem as a public health problem. Yeah, I mean, we know, yeah, depression is a problem. It's a problem to the individual, right? It's a problem to the individual, right? How is it a public? So it's like for all, everybody, and how is it public health? Right? So you would find that in a situation like that, if you want to define a public health, you want to, problem, you want to understand what public health is to begin with, right? So using which, so none of us so far actually brought in or mentioned as part of your presentation the concept of public health or the concept of health. Recall we covered a bit of this. What is health? Absence of disease? Is that what you mean? So public health means everybody has no disease. Or is public health everybody is socially well functioning, socially have a high quality of life? Right? That is the new, right? Huber's 2016 definition. Okay. So that would be one challenge. Okay, thank you very much. Good information there. For depression, anxiety prevalence in Singapore, there's a Singapore National Mental Health Study that gives very good epidemiological statistics in Singapore. It was conducted in 2010. I think they already have a second one. I don't know if they have published it yet. Since 2010. Okay. All right. Let me summarize. Okay. So, almost all of us were able to do some of these. Collect, interpret, summarize information, define the characteristics, right? I haven't heard so much about identifying gaps in the data that you try to uncover. Well, that is because you don't have enough time. Frame the problem or issue in a way that lends itself to potential policy solution. So this is something that I was trying to reiterate. Framing it as a public health problem. Because then the policy would be a public health policy. So if you frame it as a social problem, then the policy will be a social policy. Right? Frame means the way you describe, the way you write. The understanding of, say, what is health, in fact, what is public health. Right? So that is that, and okay. So that is the way we evaluate, even just, we self-critique or self-evaluate even just the problem identification bit. So I'll share this slide, so no need to really copy. So if I can summarize this portion of the lecture on public policy process, the first three components, identification, analysis, and strategy development, really is part of CDC's analytic framework. If we look broader, why these three parts are classified as a framework is potentially because that these three components, when done well, and of course engaging stakeholders and evaluation, right, which kind of touches on everything, when done well, allows any organization, allows any individual, allows that person or persons to advocate a certain policy or point of view, or certain program that may be implemented or implementable in many places. So, how is this related to our assignment? The assignment requires us to design a media piece. It could be a video, it could be a blog, right? And any media piece that tries to persuade your target audience, whoever he or she or they are, whoever those stakeholders may be, right, to do something differently, to start something new, to change the way of doing their way of doing something, to follow certain procedures, right, and so on. To do that, right, in a widespread and not just for one or two individuals, we find that we need to persuade them by first identifying the problem, right, which is what I tried to ask you to do in 15 minutes, and then by analyzing the various solutions available at our disposal, and then by ranking these various solutions, possible solutions into priorities, and then designing some kind of program. So your individual write-up would describe all these various processes. The digital media piece, that is it 5 minutes? I forgot. Is it 1 minute? It's in the course outline that you will make, that you will create, right? It's the outcome of these three. It's the outcome of these three. So it's almost like the third process. Can I move? Can I go back to it? Yeah. The outcome of this three, is this one here. So you want to share your strategy. In that piece, you could talk about, in the digital media project, you can talk about the problem, you can talk about how you have analyzed and what you have analyzed, and then say, look, we need to do this. So in the classic marketing technique, you describe the problem, right? When you try to sell something to somebody, right, a product or service, say, look, how many of you, say for instance, I want to sell a caregiving service. How many of you find it so burdensome to take care of your 90-year-old father when he falls down? Oh yeah, I've never thought of this problem. Now I think about it, right? The problem. What if I tell you that among 10 seniors who are 80 years old, 5 would fall? That means 1 in 2. So now I start to think about the seriousness of the problem. Now, what if I tell you now that, look, all of us in Singapore has this tool or have this technique which you could learn or which you could pick up that can actually prevent all these falls 95% of the time. Click here to find out more. Classic marketing steps, right? I'm just, right, doing what a business person would do. Okay? I mean, this could apply to any product. So what I'm saying here is, look, in the CDC policy process, we kind of are doing this in a public policy manner. Tell the problem, state it clearly, credibly, show it, analyze it, say why, blah, 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 and there is a document now that teaches you how to do it, and then say, look, here's the solution. We hope you would embrace it. If you do embrace it, here's how it works. Okay. All right. So that's how I will end off today's segment on the public policy process. The debate next week, the motion is already on Learn NTU. When you go to the assignment piece, I would allocate the proposition, opposition. I know which the two teams are. I will write to tell you, right? And next week we'll have our debate. One more thing. Next week, it is likely that we would change our classroom to the Hive. You know where that is? The Hive. We do not need such a big classroom anymore. Many of us, quite a number of us actually had to move from various places to here for class, or you have to move from here to some other place. So the Hive would have smaller classrooms, and that is also nearer the School of Psychology, the School of Social Sciences. So that would be the situation. I don't have a confirmation yet, right? When I confirm, I will write to an announcement to everybody. If you find that the Hive is extremely out of the way for you for some reason, write to me. I will see if I could make some provisions. I could say, I will see if I could tell the office, right? Yeah. So that's it. Final words, anybody? Final questions? Okay, thank you. See you next week.